Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute's Next Round podcast. This is our special Election Eve preview with our all-star cast, starting with Lance Izumi, Senior Director of Education, Tim Anaya, Vice President of Marketing and Communications, and Kerry Jackson, the William Clement Senior Fellow on California Reform. And I'm Rowena Itchon, COO of PRI. So welcome, guys, and welcome to everyone who is listening. So I'm going to start with Tim first. Election 2024 has been one of the most unpredictable elections ever, highlighted by the fact that we have a Californian at the top of the presidential ticket in Kamala Harris. So Tim, you and Kerry have literally just written the book on what Governor Newsom calls the California way, which are the reckless progressive policies that are inspiring politicians like Kamala Harris. So based on what you write on our book, what type of policies do you expect that the VP would pursue if she gets the job of president on November 5th?
Well, I think while she's doing her best job in these interviews, with her word salad answers, kind of not really answering the question, I think it's actually on purpose. I think she doesn't really want to tell you what she would do. And really what she would do is what we write about, which is the California way. And I think there are a couple of examples of kind of how the California way could influence a Biden or a Harris presidency. I think the biggest one for me is her plan about grocery price gouging. Now, she says when she touts this agenda, right, that she's looking out for the little guy and she wants to bring prices down low, and it's all these evil corporations that are responsible for grocery prices going up. But as we document in the book, she needs to look in the mirror because it's actually bad policies that we're already seeing in the Biden-Harris administration and things that she's talked about on the presidential campaign trail. So we know, of course, the basic right is overspending, and overspending has led to inflation, the dramatic inflation we saw, over the past couple of years. That's been the biggest culprit for price increases. But then you have the California way, and the California way manifests itself with things like retail theft, that as we saw at PRI's conference a couple of years back here in Sacramento, Keith Knopf, the president and CEO of the Raley's company, said retail theft is $60 million a year to their company. And he said that's money for nothing. That's money that can't go to lower prices so more people can afford groceries. When you look at things like Prop 12, the requirement about the size of the pens and how you produce pork and eggs and veal and things like that. That's responsible for 20+% increases in pork prices over the past couple of years. When you look at things like minimum wage, she's of course a big proponent of minimum wage increases, and we saw things like hero pay mandates during the pandemic, forcing grocery stores in certain cities to pay their workers more. Now, they did important work, but those minimum wage increases resulted in some Southern California cities in stores closing. And then you have energy costs, right? And energy costs, as Keith Knopf told us, those are costs factored into literally everything in a grocery store. And that is, he said, you can't factor in anything on prices without factoring in energy. And he says that, if what you're doing is raising energy costs, well, how are you going to lower prices? And so I think all of these things all together, right, those are right out of the California way. Those are things that are already inspiring Biden-Harris administration policy, and those are things we can expect to see in the next 4 years. The other one that I'll mention, and it's one that Kerry's fond of writing about, is AB 5. Kerry has termed it the best way. He's called it perhaps the cruelest law ever enacted. And that is, of course, our listeners are familiar, those are basically the near outlawing of independent contracting in California. And Harris and Newsom, right, will talk about we're for the little guy and we want you to all have these great jobs, but they actually don't. They don't want you to be an entrepreneur, which we know is the surest path to climbing the economic ladder and lifting people out of poverty. They want you to work in a 9-to-5 job. They want you to be a unionized employee, because what matters for them is more union workers, more union dues, more power for unions. We've seen Kamala Harris on the campaign trail talk about, it's one of the few things she's been been clear on. She wants a national version of AB 5, which is called the PRO Act, and it's very similar to AB 5, but she said, if you sign that law, I pass that law, I will sign it. The Biden-Harris administration have been pushing that both in Congress and at the regulatory level since they've gotten in. They even hired Julie Su, who was California's aggressive enforcer of AB 5, to be acting labor secretary. You can expect someone like that will be a labor secretary in a Harris administration. So, yeah, those are two clear examples, but, she may not want to say it in her interviews because it probably wouldn't be very popular, but the California way is going to be the driving force in a Harris administration.
Yeah, and if listeners want to know more about this, they ought to check out Tim and Kerry's book, The California Left Coast Survivor's Guide. And it's a PRI handbook to help the rest of America avoid making a wrong left turn. And it's available on Amazon. So Lance, let's go with you. It's a coin flip presidential race, as we all know. Donald Trump could be on the verge of winning a rare second non-consecutive term as president. So you're a member of the Trump education transition team in 2016. So you have a bit of an insider view on the former president's policy making. What do you think a Trump agenda for a second term would be, and how would it contrast with the first Trump term if he returns to the White House?
Well, thanks, Ro. I think, well, first of all, let me just say that being on President Trump's transition team for education policy in late 2016 and 2017 was really one of the great honors of my professional career. Did a lot of work with a great team of people on that team. In fact, our education policy team was actually viewed as the model policy team, in the Trump transition, certainly when it came to making recommendations of real substance. And so I think that if you look at what President Trump's second term will be, and in one of our previous podcasts, I predicted that he is going to be the next Grover Cleveland to serve two non-consecutive terms. But assuming he becomes president, I think that he's going to have three top priorities. I mean, he said that he's going to eliminate the U.S. Department of Education. Of course, that's a big, heavy lift, but that is going to be his top priority. And I think that one of the things that people need to understand about eliminating the U.S. Department of Ed is that many of the things that the department does actually can be done by other departments. It's not as if the U.S. Department of Ed is unique in its ability to carry out a lot of these programs, which oftentimes are like grant programs, job training programs. I mean, many of these types of programs can be offloaded to other departments, Department of the Treasury, Department of Labor, Department of Agriculture. And, we got to remember that the U.S. Department of Education has only been in existence since Jimmy Carter created it as a sop to the teachers' unions back in the late 1970s. So the United States has done well without a U.S. Department of Ed for most of its existence. And so I think that what you would see, in when the Department of Ed is eliminated is that, a lot of these other departments will pick up a lot of the programs from the Department of Education's list of programs. So, now short of actually eliminating the Department of Education, I think one of the things that can be done, I think this is what the Trump administration would be doing, would be to look at how to cut a lot of the, wasteful programs that are in the Department of Ed that have no track record of improving student performance, student achievement, student success, student outcomes. I've written about this, over a number of years, certainly when President Trump was in office, about different programs that have actually had research done on them. And it's been proven that these programs suck up a lot of money, but have no bang for the buck because the kids don't improve in their performance. And there are a lot of programs like that. So those are things that the administration could put on the chopping block immediately. I would say that what's important is that, even if the Republicans maintain control in Congress, in House, and gain control in the Senate, that oftentimes it's the Republicans on a lot of these committees who will actually try and preserve some of these legacy programs and not want to cut them. So it's going to be on them to actually enact these cuts in these wasteful programs. And I'd also say that in 2017, I wrote a book for PRI called The American Education Agenda, where I advocated a education waste commission, kind of like what President Reagan did back when he was president. He put together a Grace Commission, which some of our older listeners may remember, which was headed up by a man named Grace, big corporate leader who advocated a lot of cuts within the federal government. I mean, Elon Musk is going to probably have a similar type of role. At least that's what the talks been during the campaign. And so, looking at waste in the U.S. Department of Education, would be part of that agenda. And finally, I think that what the Trump administration would do, a second Trump administration would do, would be, again, to look very hard at pushing through some type of school choice program. Back when Trump was president in his first term in 2019, he had proposed education freedom scholarships, and taxpayers, in this case, taxpayers would make voluntary contributions to scholarship granting organizations, which would be identified and approved by states. And these organizations would then give out the scholarships to students that could be used for a wide variety of educational options. And taxpayers who make these contributions would receive a non-refundable dollar-for-dollar tax credit. I'd assume that you'd have something similar proposed in a second Trump administration as well. So I think that there's going to be a lot of activity in the education area. I mean, what's important, these are all efforts that are going to require a real heavy lift, and you're going to have really strong leadership in the education department in order to complete these tasks, and not just have the education department limp along to whoever comes after President Trump.
Thanks, Lance. You're right. Removing or getting rid of the education department is a tough lift, but I hope he's successful, because we've got to cut somewhere in government. And Trump in 2016 came to Washington, to the swamp, to try to mitigate all of the problems in government. And I hope, he starts with the Department of Education. So, Kerry, this one's for you. Recently, the owner of the Los Angeles Times made waves when he announced that the newspaper would not endorse a candidate in this year's presidential campaign. There have been howls of protest from the newsroom, and the editor resigned. So what's your take on this controversy, and what does it say about the state of journalism today? Shouldn't newspapers make editorial decisions without any interaction with the newsroom?
Well, this has particular interest to me, because being an editorial writer at Investors Business Daily for 18 years. But we never endorsed a candidate, but it was clear by our editorials who we preferred. But it was just something coming down from the owner publisher that we're just not going to do that. We're not going to endorse candidates. And quickly for the moment, I also add, of course, the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos' Washington Post is not endorsing a candidate. And I believe the last I heard, they had lost 200,000 subscribers over this, that's a big chunk right there. So a lot of newspapers don't have 200,000 subscribers in total. But journalism today is almost wholly political advocacy, and it's just not limited to the opinion pages, or even the news pages. We see it in sports section, we see it in the food page, we see it in business, in the featured articles. It's all over. There's just not much straight objective reporting anymore, at least not when you come to the major newspapers. 90% of the major newspapers, as far as the networks are concerned, same way. At the same time, I guess I'm a little surprised that both of these newspapers did this. I'm slightly optimistic that this might be a turning point, back to more objective journalism. Maybe some lessons have been learned here. It's a little hard to say exactly, because we're not fully sure yet why these decisions were made. There's some news or some conjecture that the LA Times owner's daughter had something to do with this decision. I guess she thought Harris was not far left enough, which I find to be odd, but that happened to the Nation. Interns there said that they didn't like the Nation's Harris endorsement. Apparently, she just wasn't radical enough. I don't know who they would endorse. Jill Stein. That's a little crazy, but I don't know. Again, I don't know. Jeff Bezos came out with some sort of statement, but I'm not fully sure. At this point, I don't know if any of us are, or why that decision was made there. And I have a friend I trust who's been in this business, the journalism business, as long as I have, and he finds it interesting that the journalists who are complaining about this, about how self-absorbed and self-important they are, as if the readership is waiting for them to tell them who to vote for. The readership is already voting, is already pretty much set up for New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times. They 90% of their readers, they know who they're going to vote for. They just want confirmation, and they more of this. Yes, I'm a good person because in the LA Times, New York Times, New York Washington Post, they confirm this for me that I'm a good person voting for the right person in office. As for editorial decisions made independent of newsrooms, you have to do that. That was one thing that, again, but going back to Investors Business Daily, there were people in the newsroom who wanted to influence what we wrote about. And that way that was set up, and the way traditionally editorial and opinion pages have been set up, they're the opinion of the overall newspaper / owner publisher. And once you start getting all these, and I'm going to be a little cliche here, all these cooks in the kitchen, the newsroom people trying to influence what's going on in the opinion pages, then you have problems. You can't really reach any kind of consensus of that number of people. And I think we've all seen instances where we have a blue ribbon panel would be appointed to try to come up with a resolution of whatever particular problem was being looked at any given time and place. But you never come up with any really good solution because there are just too many compromises made, because there's so many people with so many different ideas on board. And what you come out with is something that just has no impact whatsoever. So you can start watering down what an opinion page or an editorial pages are doing when you start dragging in people from the newsroom or allowing them in there who are quite young and green and don't really know what they're doing. And again, we've seen that, how millennials, I guess I'm sorry, Gen Zs, am I correct on that, are having effect on who gets to work at the New York Times and what they can say. So I'm trying to go back on, again, look at this in a positive, optimistic way, that maybe they've reached a point, these two papers and others will follow, that maybe we've gotten too far. And maybe simply they just see that there's no point in endorsing Harris when Trump's going to win, and then that way they can not have any trouble with Trump. But that's probably not likely. But anyway, it does come to mind.
We'll get back to Next Round in just a moment, but first, are you getting PRI's regular email updates? If not, go to pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get the facts you need to fight back delivered every week to your inbox. Every week, PRI sends you what you need to know about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and Sacramento, and gives you the free market ideas needed to save our state and our nation. By going to pacificresearch.org and clicking the sign up button, you can sign up to have Policy Alert, our weekly roundup of all the best ideas from PRI scholars delivered to your inbox. Or you can sign up for event updates, so you're the first to know when PRI is coming to your community with great events. So sign up now at pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get PRI's content delivered to your inbox each week.
So let's turn to some California issues on the ballot. Lance, lawmakers made another try at a statewide school facilities bond this year when they put Proposition 2 on the ballot. Yet the latest PPIC poll shows that it is in danger of failing, garnering just 52% of support from likely voters they surveyed. So this follows a defeat of the last statewide school bond. It used to be a given that state school bonds would pass. Why do you think that this measure is having trouble winning voter support? And do you think that voters are concerned about debt and the state's finances, or is it voters are casting judgment on the state of California's public schools?
Well, I think, Ro, that there are two reasons why this bond is in trouble and I feel probably won't pass. But I think the first reason is the simple fact that Californians are feeling really pinched economically with rising costs. I mean, everywhere you look, Californians are facing rising housing costs, rising insurance costs, rising gas costs, everything, grocery costs, just the whole gamut. Everything's rising across the country, but it's certainly rising even more here in California, and it's very difficult for people. And so when people are feeling pinched economically, I think they look at these types of financial issues on ballots and are very skeptical about them, because they're really now starting to pay attention about what's happening to their money. And so I think that's the first thing. Secondly, I think it's really the failure of the product. I mean, this bond is supposed to be for facilities, but when people look at the public school system, it really has been failing to perform for years, but especially recently. I mean, you look at the recent state test scores that came out, and through testing in grades 3 through high school, you have 53% of students failing to meet reading standards, grade level reading standards, and in mathematics, off the charts, right? 65% fail to meet grade level standards in mathematics. See, actually, even worse, California's performance is even worse on the national test, the National Assessment of Educational Progress that was given back in 2022, when 7 out of 10 eighth graders, so that's like 70% plus of eighth graders, failed to perform at the proficient level in math and reading. And when people look at that type of outcome for students and look at then the quality of the product that they're being asked to pay for, people make the simple decision that, look, why should I pay more money that will have an impact on me economically if I'm going to be getting a failing product? Just shoveling money into a machine that is just giving you more of the same just is insanity. And so I think that that's what people are doing when they're looking at this bond with a real skeptical eye, because they're not feeling like they're going to get any bang for the buck. And also, too, I mean, you look at the people who are in favor of it. I mean, the teachers' unions, the Building Industry Association, people are going to benefit by it. But they're not making the case that if this bond is passed, students are going to do better, in the classroom, that we're going to have higher test scores, higher achievement rates, higher graduation rates, all of those outcome indicators for students. That argument is not being made by the proponents. And I think that people, when they see the commercials being pushed by the proponents, I don't think they're being convinced that this is going to be money that's going to be well spent. And they don't have a lot of money to spend in their pocketbooks.
So, Kerry, the California ballot was almost designed with you in mind, as the ballot is filled with issues that you routinely write about, such as Proposition 33, which is the latest battle over rent control in the state. Give us an update on what's going on with this measure, and what would the proposal do if it were to pass? And of course, based on your analysis, what would the impact of more rent control legislation be on California's housing crisis? And what do you think the voters will do this time?
Proposition 33 is, if approved by voters, is going to allow local governments to increase or expand rent control laws. From my perspective, this is bad for a number of reasons. I think anybody from any free market, limited government perspective is going to say the same thing. You're going to start limiting supply. You're going to ruin neighborhoods if this passes, because for one reason, if you're renting a home, if you're renting apartments, whatever you have, you might take them off the market if you can't continue to make a profit off of your investment, off of your holding. And then again, if you can't increase rent, then you might decide, well, the renovations I was going to make on the house, or the repairs I was going to make, maybe the gardener comes once a month instead of every 2 weeks or every week. So things start falling into disrepair. Neighborhoods don't look quite as good as they used to be. They can, this is not good for anybody who lives nearby. And I'll refer to this, and I know at this point it's almost become a cliche or used too often, but there is a Swedish economist, and my understanding, and I think everybody who's written about this economist, Assar Lindebeck, is he's a socialist, but he said that there's hardly a better way to destroy a city than rent control, unless you're talking about bombing the city. So that's pretty, that's a strong statement, and it's a bit of an embellishment, but it makes a point. Sometimes you have to exaggerate or embellishment, I think, to get a point across when people aren't really paying attention, or not paying enough attention. And to go back to, I believe that the next or last question, this is going to just cause California's housing crisis to become even worse. The market's going to get tighter. It's not going to help anybody except the people who are going to be having fun with their lower rents. Are getting this to their benefit, but it's overall you're taking a segment of the population and benefiting them at the expense of everybody else. I'm thinking this thing is not going to make it, and one of the reasons I said that is September. 51%, and this is in polling, 51% said, we support Proposition 33. We're going to vote for it. That has fallen all the way to 42% in the most recent poll that I've seen. That's a big decline. And now we're approaching, we're a week away from, as we're taping here, from the election. I'm thinking this is going to fail. I attribute some of that to some effective ads. that have been out there and I have seen. But I'm going to go back to what I was saying before. Maybe some lessons are learned. Maybe that's why these newspapers aren't endorsing a candidate who would have been Harris for sure. Is maybe we're getting to a point where the pendulum maybe not swinging back, but at least maybe has stopped in California from the swing it's been making toward blue state, progressive, hard left Democratic, hard left policy. So maybe this is a sign that that pendulum is at least slowing and maybe stopping and maybe coming back a little bit in the other direction. At least that's one thing I'm hopeful for.
So staying in California, Lance, this is perhaps the most high-profile measure on the November ballot. It's Proposition 36, which would impose greater accountability against those committing retail theft in California. Surprisingly, this measure is receiving 73% of support in the latest PPIC poll, which is the biggest level of support PPIC has ever measured for a ballot initiative in their polls. So, Lance, you have experience as an attorney. You are a former speech writer to Tough on Crime Governor George Deukmejian and Attorney General Meese. Why do you think that after veering leftward on criminal justice policy in recent years, even liberal California seems poised to say enough is enough?
Well, Ro, I think, if you look at the situation today, California is really kind of where it was back in the late 1970s and early 1980s. So if you look back at that time period, violent crime rates were skyrocketing. They peaked around 1980, actually when Ronald Reagan was elected president. There was a feeling that the public safety system was not protecting the safety of the public, and that the data actually showed that that was true. So if you look back in 1980, California's state prison population was actually 30% below the national average, but the violent crime and burglary rates were 40% above the national average. So there's a huge imbalance in terms of the amount of crime and the punishment that was being meted out to those who were the perpetrators. And so, there were also, at that time, highly publicized murderers who, like the Hillside Strangler, the Night Stalker, the Freeway Killer. And so, people were scared for their own safety. And yet, in the face of this crime wave, in the face of the fear of the public, the criminal justice system just seemed totally unable to protect them. And not only that, but actually seemed to be on the side of the criminals. So you saw courts and legislators who were Jerry Brown, who was governor at the time. You saw that there seemed to be an extension of rights to criminals, expanding rights of the accused, limiting the authority of the police, curbing the use of evidence in crimes, and reducing the effectiveness of the death penalty. So I think that at that time, Californians actually reached their intolerance point, and that's why they voted for my old bosses, Ronald Reagan for president and George Deukmejian as governor. And I worked in both administrations, as you pointed out, and fighting crime was really a key initiative of both Reagan and Deukmejian. George Deukmejian increased the number of prisons. He enacted tough on crime laws. He led the successful campaign against anti-death penalty state Supreme Court justices like Chief Justice Rose Byrd, and he then appointed common sense judges. Deukmejian really championed initiatives like the Victims' Bill of Rights, which easily passed. And I wrote a lot of George Deukmejian's tough on crime speeches, and it was, I believe, this unyielding defense of crime victims that made him so popular at the time. And I think the same thing is happening today. The pendulum in criminal justice policy has swung back to the time, unfortunately, of the high crime in the 1970s and 80s. We had Proposition 47, which rolled back punishment for various crimes, including making theft and anything valued less than $950 a misdemeanor instead of a felony. And so, Californians have really been shocked by what has happened because of these policies. And now they're seeing these rampant smash and grab robberies, mass gang thefts, skyrocketing drug use and drug infestation, and seeming total inability of the criminal justice system to actually deter these crimes. So, and I think that one of the things that is the reason why this initiative is going to pass by such a massive landslide is that crime knows no partisan divide. So you can be a Democrat, you can be independent, you can be a Republican, you can be a liberal, a conservative, a moderate, but you can be a crime victim system because criminals do not make distinctions based upon party or ideology. And that's why you hear, from people all across the board who are average people who have stories about their cars being broken into, their homes being burglarized, and their safety being threatened. And so I think it's really the situation just like several decades ago where law-abiding people in this state have reached their intolerance point, which is why Prop 36 is going to pass in a record landslide. And literally, I think people are just sick and tired of feeling unsafe in their everyday lives.
Kerry, another issue that you've written about is Proposition 32, which would raise the minimum wage in California. Usually, raising the minimum wage receives pretty strong public support, but voters this time appear poised to reject the measure based on the results from the latest PPIC survey. So share with our listeners your analysis of how another minimum wage would impact jobs, employers, and California's economy, and why, in your view, do you think voters might finally be coming around to your way of thinking on this issue?
Well, just to get the technical or the details out of the way, this is going to increase, if it passes, the minimum wage, statewide minimum wage from $16 an hour to $18 an hour. And this would be for employers who have 26 or more work. And it would go to $17 an hour for the employers who have 25 or fewer workers. And then this has happened all in 2025. This would be a very quick turnaround. And in 2026, the $18 would be the minimum wage for everybody. This is another one where there's a little bit of been a surprise turnaround with the polling. It went from 50% support to down to 44%. And I think maybe again, we're seeing a little bit of that. Rather than go back to the pendulum swing again, let's call it something of a course correction in California. Again, that's what I'm hoping for. But minimum wage laws always hurt the very people that they are supposed to help, that we're told that they're going to help. The minimum wage, as has been said many times, is zero, and that's exactly what many will be earning if this proposition passes. And so how can that possibly be happening? But employers don't have an unlimited amount of money to fund their labor. They do have, if you're going to stay in business anyway, if you're going to make a profit, if you're going to make it worth your time to have a business, you just can't give in and there's just only a certain amount of money left over you can pay for your labor. So they're going to have to make decisions. They're going to have to cut staff. They're going to have to cut hours. They're going to have to not hire. And that's a tough situation if a small company or medium-sized company said, let's expand. We're ready to move on to the next step. We are ready to hire X number of people, several dozen, maybe just 10 or 12. Maybe it's going to be closer to 100. We want that much of an expansion. But we can't do it now because the minimum wage is going to go up and it's going to eat into our labor, the funds we have available to pay, and we just can't do it. So that hurts everybody. That hurts the entire economy. So minimum wage laws, in this sense, they're a little bit like rent control. They can wreck the labor market like it was being bombed, if I may go back to that. So I'm optimistic that this is the California voters are going to, as I said, correct what's been going on here for a few decades and say, no, you can't do that.
We'll get back to our great guest in just a moment. But first, are you following PRI on Facebook? By following PRI at facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute, that's all one word, you'll be the first to read free market ideas from PRI's terrific team of scholars on all the hot issues like education freedom, single-payer healthcare, crime, homelessness, green mandates like the ban on natural gas appliances, and more. Plus, when you follow PRI at facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute, you'll be the first to know when tickets go on sale for PRI's must-attend luncheons, dinners, and galas across the state. And you'll be first in line to secure your spot to hear great speakers like Michael Schellenberger, Gordon Chang, Steve Hilton, and many more. So go to facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute and follow PRI today so you'll be the first to know.
Tim, the road to the House majority will likely flow through California once again, as the state is home to 9 competitive congressional races. In 2022, Republicans won most of these seats, so it's going to be, again, close in 2024, as the latest PPIC poll shows that these battleground races are essentially tied. So give us a preview of some of these important races that we should be keeping an eye on throughout election night.
Yeah, I think we're going to be up late and maybe waiting weeks to know the outcome of some of these races. And you're right. I mean, who is speaker next fall will have, or who is speaker in January will have California to thank. So let's look at some of these races here. So one is Congressional District 45, where Michelle Steele is battling for re-election against Derek Tran. This is an interesting fight on kind of ethnic lines, right? Because Tran would be first Vietnamese American member of Congress if he was elected. This district right now has the distinction of being the number one race in the country for party spending. $26.4 million has been spent by both candidates and their parties in this election. Now, Steele has had a bit of an advantage in that spending, but she's in a tough fight. I think most people would be surprised to see her lose that seat. You know, we had a Democrat poll that came out about 10 days ago showing her losing by 3. So, you know, I think this is one where if that's your internal poll, where you usually have a little bit of a thumb on the scale, well, you know, it's probably a pretty dead even race. The early voting in Orange County is pretty even. Democrats are a little ahead in the ballots returned thus far. So, you know, anything can happen there. Really, I think one of the most interesting races, a real battleground race, is Congressional District 41, where Congressman Ken Calvert is, redistricting, changed his district to be less favorable to Republicans. And so he is in a rematch of the last election against Will Rollins. You know, last time the Democrats didn't take Will Rollins seriously. They didn't really put in the money, and he had a very close race. He's someone you should not sleep on. He's someone who I met him at the Arnold reunion last year. He worked during his younger years in our administration, and he is a nice guy. He's an impressive guy. Whatever your politics, I think you would be impressed meeting this guy. He's someone who I could see winning that seat. You know, the polls are dead even, but he's running a very aggressive race, and he's been raising huge sums. And remember, Ken Calvert has 30 plus years of incumbency. It's kind of an albatross. If we were to wake up the day after the election and you said Will Rollins won, I would not be surprised. That's one. I think that'll be a very key race to who wins the majority in the House. Now, one Republican rep who's been hugely outspent is John Duarte, who's running here in the Central Valley, in the Sacramento area, Merced, Modesto ways. It's a rematch of last time where he's running against former state legislator Adam Gray. And so far in this party spending, Duarte's been outspent by about $3 million. But it's another narrow race. He's only just very narrowly behind or tied in the polls. Now, remember, Duarte only won by about 500 votes in 2022. So anything can happen here, but certainly if you watch Sacramento television, Gray has the advantage there. But then you look at one where may be an advantage for Republicans, and that's CD 47, where Scott Baugh, former Assembly Republican leader, former Orange County Republican Party chair, he was a narrow loser to Katie Porter in the last election. He came a lot closer than anybody thought. He even was ahead for a good chunk of election night. She vacated the seat in her failed bid for the U.S. Senate, and Baugh's running against Dave Min, who's a state senator. Very good fundraiser, but he's been dogged by a recent DUI, and it really is hurting him in the polls. Min has never really led in any polls that I've seen, and the most recent poll released last week shows him 3 points behind Baugh. So, you know, you're looking there that, you know, if Baugh can get his voters out, he may just very well be on his way to Washington. A couple of other interesting ones. There's Congressional District 22, where David Valadao is in a tough fight. These last two seats I'm going to talk about are ones that kind of defy the odds, right? If you look at them on paper, you would think a Republican like Valadao would have no shot, because on paper it's a, decently Democratic district. But Valadao's been resilient. I think he's running for what would be his 6th term in the House. Yes, he was defeated once, but came back last time and defeated then Assemblyman Rudy Salas. And the latest Emerson College poll out shows that it's a less than 2% race. So anything can happen here. Valadao, has been beating Salas in the money race, and the crystal ball ratings just came out and moved the race from toss-up to leans Republicans. So I think that's one where if I were going to put $1 down, I would put $1 down on Valadeo. And then the last one that could go any way is in the Santa Clarita area, Congressman Mike Garcia, who again on paper you would think he should not be in the running here. Well, he's run and won 3 tough election fights in a row and won them all. This time he's running against George Whitesides, who is the CEO of the Virgin Galactic, the private space program. And he also had a career working at NASA before that and running a tough race. And the Democrats are pouring everything but the kitchen sink in that area. There's an overlapping state Senate race that's very competitive, and the Democrat there is outspending the Republican like 4-1. Garcia is someone that I wouldn't bet against, but it's a very tough, very close fight. So, this is one where having a different House Speaker is probably a difference in these races versus 2022, because Kevin McCarthy as Speaker, A, had an added interest in making sure that we won all these congressional races in California, but B, that it's a difference in the fundraising prowess of a Speaker McCarthy versus a Speaker Johnson, whereas in 2022, Republicans weren't outspent very many places. And in 2024, there's a little bit of they're having to fend for themselves. So lots of interesting things to watch as we stay up late on election night.
Thanks for that, Tim. So this is a question for everyone. We want to wind down our discussion of campaign 2024 with a chef's choice. So there's obviously too many races and ballot measures for us to cover in one podcast. So share with our listeners one important race or ballot measure that you're following this election that you don't think is receiving the coverage that it should, and why. So Lance, let's go with you first.
Well, one of the races that I'm looking at, and it's not one of the congressional races that Tim mentioned, but one that I'm following is the race between Kevin Kiley, who's the incumbent Republican congressman first term in the Sacramento suburban area, versus Jessica Morse, who is a top appointee of Governor Newsom. And Kiley's been one of the most effective critics of Governor Newsom. Really, I don't think that there's anybody else in California who has been as trenchant and effective a critic of the governor throughout Newsom's term than Kiley, when he was both in Congress and also prior when he was in the state assembly. So you're seeing a lot of ads by the Democrats in favor of Jessica Morse in the Sacramento area, and so it's I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I mean, that district leans Republican, but it'll be interesting to see how much of a margin, if assuming Kiley is able to win, how much of a margin his margin of victory is, how close it is, and what effect the turnout is going to be in California. I've heard that California Republicans and Trump supporters are turning out in greater numbers. So will that end up helping not only the people that Tim talked about, the Republicans, but also people like Kevin Kiley?
Kerry, what are you following?
I saw something that caught my eye and interested me so much that I went ahead and wrote about it, and that's Measure G in San Diego. It's looking for more money for transportation infrastructure projects, or all transportation infrastructure projects. And it would boost the sales tax by half percentage point if it passes. It's interesting. You see all the money we pour into additional and new and extra taxes for transportation, and now we go back to Senate Bill 1, which Tim can remember is better than me. 2017 it passed. And that's just been adding taxes burden to us every year since. And what do we get for it? Well, I don't see any new roads. I don't see much repair. I don't see new lanes on the freeway. I still see congestion out there. But you might find things like more bike lanes that nobody's using. You might find a transportation museum that's got extra funding or new funding, a railroad museum. Money gets poured into transit systems that nobody wants to ride in, that are just going nowhere, literally. Well, whatever the mode is going somewhere, but it doesn't have enough people in it to pay for itself. I want to see what happens with this. San Diego has changed a little bit in the 20 plus, well, getting close to 30 years I've lived in California. And I kind of like to see how this turns out. Are we realizing, are they realizing that adding taxes for transportation funds or for more transportation funds and projects is just always a loser? Or are they going to just keep saying, well, okay, sure, we want better roads. What's a half penny? And as I had mentioned in what I had written, it's not just a half penny here. There are several ballot measures in San Diego to increase the tax a little bit here, a little bit there. Californians are already taxing sales taxes very stiffly as when you in relation to the rest of the country. So maybe something, and I don't want to go back to what I was saying before about being optimistic. Maybe we've reached a point of where things are turning around, but we'll see if San Diego can start something and say, no, if we need to really fund the things that really need to be worked on to keep things from maybe a rail line from collapsing off the coast there. But we can find these dollars elsewhere. We don't have to go deeper into each other's pockets. There's money to be found if the government doesn't misallocate, doesn't waste what it already has. So I'm looking at that one. I'd like to see how that one turns out, and maybe that'll be a signal for things to come.
Tim, what about you?
Well, I'm following a race not in California, but actually it's a U.S. Senate race in Nebraska. And it's been a little underreported, but, there's a big fight for the U.S. Senate majority going on. And it seems pretty clear like the Republicans are going to win enough seats to win the majority in the Senate. But Nebraska could be saying, not so fast, my friends. And we've seen it's kind of a quirky race where you have Senator Deb Fischer, the Republican incumbent, is running for her third term. And she's running against an independent who's really kind of a faux Democrat named Osborne, who's been challenging her. And he's kind of Nebraska's version of John Fetterman. He kind of, wears kind of working man clothes, and he kind of talks like, I'm a real guy, and she's a career politician. And, obviously outside liberal dark money groups have been spending millions of dollars to boost Osborne's candidacy. And Fischer really has been running a poor campaign and has a little bit been caught asleep at the switch. Well, you've been seeing poll after poll showing Osborne ahead and ahead outside the margin of error. Now, Republican money has been coming into the race late, but the New York Times poll out just yesterday showed it's just a 2-point race. So you could see a real possibility for a massive upset in the U.S. Senate and a massive upset in who controls the U.S. Senate if an Osborne wins. Osborne is closing his campaign. The ads that are being run, I think they're independent ads. I'm not sure if they're independent ads or his own ads, but calling himself, I'm the conservative, the true conservative in the race. And he's running on conservative values and kind of hitting Fischer for being a typical, congressional incumbent and taking money from special interest groups and such. So I would keep my eye on that one on election night, because that race, however that goes down, could really frustrate Republican plans to take over the majority in the Senate.
So for our last question, let's end with predictions. So we're going to ask our panelists to make 2 predictions. First, we sent our panelists this Electoral College map 270 to win and asked them to fill in their predicted Electoral College scores. So what do you think, or who do you have winning the presidential election? And what is the Electoral College breakdown and why? So let's go with Tim, who asked us to do all of this.
Well, and of course, I think we want to let our listeners know we're taping this on October 29th, and there's a lot of life left between now and when the ballots are starting to be counted on 1 week from today. And every battleground state is within 2 points. So with that caveat there, I have it right now as 287 for Trump, 251 for Harris. But in kind of putting this together this morning, I could have just as easily had it 276 to 262 for Harris. Pennsylvania and Nevada today, if you look at, I did the data dives and went through everybody's analysis, those look like just very narrowly going Trump right now, but they could just as easily tomorrow be going very narrowly for Harris. Looks like Trump is on the way to win in Arizona and Georgia and North Carolina. I have Wisconsin and Michigan right now, both blue. Those could easily go, one or both of those could very easily go very narrowly for Trump. And Michigan is a complicated race with the, all the politics of Israel and Gaza and the Arab American vote there. But right now, as of this moment, I have it 287 Trump, 251 Harris.
Lance, how about you?
Well, I will say first off that, kidding aside from my colleagues, I did not give Donald Trump 400 electoral votes. but I have given him 340. And I think,
Whoa.
I think that he's going to sweep all of the swing states. And I believe that he'll even pick up a number of the dark horse states like New Hampshire and maybe a couple long shots like Minnesota, where Rasmussen poll recently came out showing that he's 3 points behind, and Virginia, where Rasmussen poll came out a day or two ago saying that he's 2 points behind. Trump is going to be making doing a rally in Virginia, which I think indicates that the campaign believes that they have a shot of flipping Virginia. I think with Governor Youngkin and Republicans controlling the state constitutional offices, that there is a chance there. And who knows, there may be other dark horse states that we're not talking about that actually could go that way. Right now, the Republican early vote looks pretty good, much better than in previous years. And also, too, the fact that Trump is either narrowly ahead or tied with Harris right now. You got to look back at 2020 and 2016, where he was down significantly in a lot of these states and ended up either winning or very narrowly losing. And so the fact that he is doing so well in the polls, I think is an indication that things are looking good for him and that there is momentum going his way. And I think that's the big thing, is that there is momentum. I think that when you step back and look at why he's doing so well, he's just the campaign has been run really well. It's been an excellent campaign. He's connected with the average person through events. I think it was really brilliant to go and cook French fries at McDonald's and going on Joe Rogan's podcast, which I think the last time I looked at the numbers has reached now 34 million people. So, and he's also brought on new supporters like Elon Musk and Tulsi Gabbard, who have been very exciting for the base and for people who are trying to make up their mind. And, I think most importantly, he's really remade the Republican Party into a working class party where you have a working class coalition that I think has the opportunity to give him enough new voters so that he's going to be able to win, I think, by a larger margin than people expect. And, it also turns out, I believe that, J.D. Vance has been a brilliant move by him in retrospect. I mean, at the time, people were questioning whether that was going to be the best choice, but certainly he's proven to be probably one of the most effective vice presidential picks that, certainly in recent history. And so, and I think it's also worth noting that it's not just people like me, but the establishment media is actually saying out loud that there is a possibility that Trump could win the popular vote, and not just the electoral vote, but the popular vote as well, which Republicans by and large never do. So anyway, that's my forecast for this coming next week.
How about you, Kerry?
If we had done this 2 weeks ago, I would have said that I think Harris is going to win, not necessarily narrowly, but fairly narrowly in the Electoral College. That's just the way I had been seeing this and wondering how this could possibly be the case. At the same time, I go back to something probably 20 years ago, and I'll refer to my days at Investors Business Daily again. A UCLA professor who's now at George Mason University, and actually I believe was at Stanford at one time too, and maybe Caltech, named Tim Grosclose, economist, visited. And he had, I want to say at that time, it was not a study, but a book saying, he'd done the research and looked at media bias and said every Democrat, at least in, I guess, congressional elections on up and a lot of large statewide races too, every Democrat essentially starts out with a 10-point lead because of the media bias. So that's always that's always in the back of my mind. How can the Republicans ever overcome that? So I got on this map, and it was fun. And I thought it was going to be an outlier. But I'm actually between Tim and Lance. I have the Republicans or Trump with 318 electoral votes and Harris at 220. I think maybe the difference is here I have New Mexico still on the blue side. I am not sure what Lance, I can't remember what he said about New Mexico on his. But I have Virginia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin going to Trump, and of course through the South to Georgia, North Carolina. I'm seeing things that I thought I would not see over the last week or so, and you get sometimes these gut feelings that build after you keep seeing things, and people keep talking about internal polls. Well, what the Harris campaign? What are those internal polls showing? And how is that playing out in what we're seeing every day? And the same with Trump. Now, Trump said, I guess it was on Sunday, said, well, our internal poll is saying that I'm got a good lead. I'm not supposed to say that, but that's actually what people are showing in our internal polling. I look at the poly markets, the betting markets too, and last time I saw, they were expanding greatly for Trump. And there's an interesting question that doesn't get asked enough, or at least the results of it on polling doesn't get published enough. And this is apparently a very strong indicator when they ask respondents, who do you think your friends and neighbors are going to vote for? And this is, if a lot of people are saying they're going to vote for candidate, but let me boil it down. In this case, we're finding polls are saying they're asking that question. A pretty good margin of people are saying, no matter who they're voting for, they're saying, yeah, my neighbors and people I know, they're going to vote for Trump. So that's another indicator that's shown to me or come to me on saying, I think this may be a larger, not a landslide, but a pretty big gap when it's over.
Well, I'm at 281 for Trump and 257 for Harris, and I pretty much have most states going to Trump, but Harris taking Wisconsin and Michigan. So, second prediction. Donald Trump won 34% of the vote in California in 2020, a little over 6 million votes. What percentage of the vote do you think he'll get in California in 2024 running against native daughter Kamala Harris? Lance, let's go with you again.
Well, I think that he's going to do better. I think that he'll win over 40% of the vote in California. I think that from what I hear, there's been an increase in early Republican voting. So I think that Trump will exceed his previous proportion. He don't believe that he'll win California. Even my optimism isn't that much. But I think he will do better. So I think he'll be over 40%.
Tim?
I think he will do very narrowly better. I'll say 35%.
Kerry?
Again, I'm in the middle. That's the easiest place to be, I guess, in the middle. I don't have to go. I would say somewhere to the 30 to 42%, and certainly be an improvement. I think in 2016, I think Trump got even less, a smaller margin proportion than he did with Biden, maybe 32%. Does that sound correct? It was
it was low 30s in both elections.
Yeah. Okay. I was thinking that's what my memory said. So I think he's going to do better. I think that people are a little tired of things the way they've been the last 4 years, even in California. And I think even though she is the favorite daughter, I think a lot of people out here know a lot about her and have seen her in action and in inaction. And while she's been able to cover up, or at least try to cover her positions nationally, and so, that's not really what I thought. I'm actually for fracking now, and on. Many other examples. I think people out here, they understand. They've seen her, and they're not fooled by that. So. They're like, should we inflict this on the rest of the country? It's still going to be a big gap. 60-40 still a big gap. It would be an improvement over 2020 and 16.
Well, I'm going to go with 38% because a lot of Hispanics are pulling for Trump, and so are Blacks. And I think that he is going to do a bit better here in the state. So thanks everyone for listening. Thanks guys for participating, and we'll be back after the election to do our assessment. Thanks again. Bye. If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Itchon. Hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.